Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli from offgridmontana.com. And we are going to discuss a few things today. We have two guests, one regular guest. I'll introduce them both in a moment. You know, we spend a lot of time, especially in the new media, talking about certain scares and bad news and things like that, and well-deserved. But we also have to balance it out with ideas and solutions. And having a balanced life, if you listen to me over the last 6 years on different radio stations, especially here, you know that I talk about ideas and solutions, suggestions, advice, outside-the-box thinking in a different way of life. Because, you know, I can go from radio station to blog to website and hear things about the ice age and the earth overheating like Stephen Hawking was saying, the San Andreas Fault in California, the New Madras Fault, and the ocean reaching the Great Lakes in the middle of the country, the Ring of Fire. Boy, there's certainly a lot of information about that these days. Yellowstone blowing up. Planet X, Nibiru destroying the Earth, peak oil, world nuclear war, pandemics like Ebola, Black Plague, bird flu. We can talk about all the things out there that most of us really can't do anything about. So what we're going to try and do, and what we try to do here on USAPrepares.com, is talk about ideas and solutions. And I'm going to introduce our regular guest. I know most of you who listen to this show are very familiar with Rick Miller. And I want to introduce Dr. Richard Allen Miller to the show. Welcome, Rick.
Good morning. The second one, is that twice? He said yes?
I'm going to introduce him immediately after you say hi.
Yes. Yeah, no, go take care of it, please.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
everybody knows me. I don't give a damn about me. I'm Rick. Young turd.
No, that's fine. I'll get back to you. That's fine. Okay. Who I'm going to introduce next is a young man. He's a millennial. The M word. But he's actually a millennial doing something about it. He's not stuck on the fact that everything is going to crash and burn, and if they do, he's got a plan B. And one of the things that I always talk about, if you know who I am on the air, I try to give advice for the little guy, the little people, the poor/middle class, the people who can't control their own destiny, who has no representation under the law, no restitution under the law. Basically, the forgotten man and woman on the bottom 93%. Those are the people who get exploited with group identity politics by the elite, so we infight and chaos within each group against one another, race, gender, sex, or sexual orientation, religion, ideology, even generation. Well, what we need is people who have ideas and solutions that's outside the box. And this young man, his name is Thrice Seita, and I'm probably butchering his name, but for those of you who aren't driving and aren't listening to AM or FM, his website is N as in November, A as in Apple, S as in Sam, F as in Frank, .life. Thrice, welcome to USAPrepares.com. How are you this morning?
I'm kind of still waiting for this amazing millennial you're talking about, but I'm doing good. Thank you very much for that intro. I'm very appreciative of being able to be on here and share what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I had a nice, lengthy conversation with you yesterday. And just so you know, listeners, Dr. Richard Allen Miller, or Rick Miller, he recommended me to contact Thrice. And as soon as I got off the phone with him, Thrice called. And I'm looking at his website right now, and there's sections on free-range poultry, on fresh vegetables, on classes and internships, poultry sales, class on chicken compost feed method, class on wild edibles, which I can certainly teach here in Montana, and I do, class on wildcraft and commercial mushrooms. So you're basically getting back to nature. And Thrice, we had this conversation yesterday, and when we talked about the imbalances of life, and you remember me talking about the millennials, of course I was doing this tongue-in-cheek, have a very poor balance between nature and technology. And you're trying to break that mold. Tell the American people what you're doing with your website and your goals.
All right. I mean, really, it's fairly simple. It's kind of utilizing things that already exist, but combining them together. And two of the big things, like you're saying, is kind of the whole concept of being with nature, wildcrafting, as well as farming, you know, the more sustainable side of agriculture, mixed with our advancing technology. So for millennials, unfortunately, we're constantly bombarded by all this click-through technology, so we have a hard time staying focused. But there is a lot of us who are focused on this kind of more natural approach to sustainability, and it can be a little overbearing where you get a lot of the hippie culture coming back. So I don't know, I got really into this because I guess the best place to start is I got sick when I was in my early 20s, and I had to kind of. And so that's what led me on this journey, is finding out about food deserts, about people not having access to grocery stores and regular food, and then, realizing that I didn't even eat the regular food that I had access to. I pretty much ate prepackaged food all the time. And just what is all that? What are we being sold? These bright colors, these, fancy logos, and constantly the psychological bombardment when you walk into a corner store or even a grocery store nowadays. All that stuff, it really kind of, I started learning about, the psychology of marketing and everything going on with the larger picture of our economy. So it really it led me into this idea of utilizing the same concept that we see every day in crowdfunding of, new technologies, new ideas, basic innovations, and turning that into kind of an agricultural resource, because the sad fact is not only in millennials, but just in our population in general of over 300 million people in our country alone, only a quarter of us really want to farm. So for me, that's a huge issue. And so I wanted to find a way to bridge that gap between the majority of our population and those who really are passionate about agriculture. And it's like you're talking about fighting for the little man, that's really what this comes down to, is majority of that quarter of our population that even want to be in agriculture, they're not people who are generally striving to be millionaires and billionaires. I mean, some of them may want to lead large farming industry, but that's only like a fraction of that 25%. So these are the real numbers. I mean, this is the reality, and I'm a very big realist and trying to approach the situation. And yeah, the doom and gloom, all the craziness going on in the world. I mean, a lot of millennials know that's happening, and we are really kind of like, wow, thanks, guys, because we realize that it's, if we don't do something about it, we're just tossing it off to the next generation too. So it's definitely something that's really can be daunting, but at the same time, I personally feel passionate about what I'm doing. I know there's tons of other millennials that feel passionate about their projects, whether it's agriculture or not, and I think that utilizing this crowdfunding concept, utilizing this social media concept, getting away from the kind of popularity thing and more about going back to like utilizing your dollar as your vote, and really teaching that to millennials and the next generations, that it's like, you make the decision. If you focus on these content creators and throw them your dollars to give them money for their merchandise and their content, that's what you're saying is important in our world. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're trying to show, is we want to use content utilizing community events. And at the core of this, our first campaign is indoor community farming. And so our goal is to not so much become a farming monopoly as a large farm organization. North American Sustainable Farms is meant to be a sustainable farm organization, a network. So our goal is to really build these indoor community farm centers is really in order to repair economy by restoring old retail spaces, mainly shopping malls, and converting them into more agricultural-based retail spaces, as well as worker spaces. I guess what I'm trying to say is maker spaces is kind of the new term where people can either create doing crafts or create using technologies and really start to push that new modern society where we're creating more as humans instead of just reselling all the time. So that's kind of the real centralized part of what we're trying to do. But the larger part of that is from those indoor community farm centers, we want to spread that agricultural education and rebuild the economies of the area by providing resources and funding to local farmers or educational centers that want to farm, even local companies who want to start farming and raising their own food. My goal is to have sponsorships for those kind of things because it doesn't have to be a nonprofit for you to sponsor and to raise money from the community. Doing the sponsorship concept, it basically just carries that crowdfunding thing over where we want to see this as a community. It benefits our local economies and larger overall national economy if small businesses succeed. That's just the reality. So if we take that acknowledgement and use that in agriculture, I don't know how we can't succeed going into the future here. You know what I mean?
Well, Bryce, I got to say, first of all, that was very, very well said. Secondly,
thank you.
I think you mentioned when you were talking about the education part of it, I think it's so easy to educate people when you basically mention certain facts, like 96% of Monsanto shareholders voted to not disclose their GMO ingredients, and as you know, they're now called Bayer, which is a real shame because that's how most Americans got used to Bayer Children's Aspirin. So they're really, it really is an oxymoron, hypocrisy statement there. We will be back with Dr. Richard Allen Miller and Thrice after the break, folks. Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli this morning from offgridmontana.com. And I do want to mention, I want to thank Jason, who's engineering the broadcast, who did me a few favors this morning. Did everything on cue like was supposed to be done. So, Jason, I want to personally thank you for what you did this morning. And we have two guests, Dr. Richard Allen Miller, and we also have Thrice. And his website is N as in November, A as in Apple, S as in Sam, F as in Frank, .life. Thrice say Ita, and I hope I'm not butchering that thrice, but we're talking about a lot of the things that you're doing in the education, especially back in the, relearning some of those 19th century skills. And before the break, I mentioned about Monsanto, which is now under the name of Bayer, which is a real shame. And, the education that we need to talk about things like amino acids, like proteins, like enzymes. They're a group of proteins that are produced by living cells and act as catalysts for biochemical reactions, which aids in digestion and nutrient support. And I'm sure a lot of people don't realize that when you cook your food beyond 130 degrees Fahrenheit, you kill those enzymes. And when you eat raw, it actually is kind of like a cleansing release of toxins. So the more education I feel that people would get from this lifestyle, we talked privately thrice for a little bit yesterday, and I think I mentioned to you that most people are not aware that the vitamins and minerals come from the soil. You can go to a grocery store and buy the prettiest, most colorful vegetables in the world, and they have no nutrients in them, kind of like an iceberg lettuce type thing. Unless you know where that vegetable is grown, and is it chemical nutrients? I mean, they're growing potatoes in Idaho literally in sand and gravel just through chemical production. So I think if people understood the benefits of immune stimulants versus immune suppressants, like sugar, for example, and certain vegetables that are immune stimulants, like garlic, onions, cayenne pepper, horseradish, ginger, pretty much the whole cabbage family, asparagus. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to the immune stimulation from those particular vegetables. But Thrice, how, you said a lot of good things in the last segment. How can people or townships or anybody who wants to get involved, and I sure hope that this broadcast gives you the exposure that you deserve. So how can people get in touch with you if they wanted to get involved?
Well, that's first of all, what you're talking about is super important, and one of the key things along with that I want to emphasize with just understanding the nutrient makeup of your food is also the correlation of the distance the food has to travel, and that's why we're so focused on establishing local community food centers, so we can basically create that sense of, as a nation, you don't have to go more than a couple hours to actually find almost all the food you need when it comes to local farm food. Because there's no reason we can't utilize technology to grow certain things indoors that we can't grow other places, as well as creating a system where northern states grow certain things some years and southern states grow other things. Not years, but months. Like there's definitely systematic approaches that we can create more of a local sustainable environment when it comes to the food you eat, which then increases the nutrient density. So that's a huge thing of the whole local food movement concept that I just want to emphasize on what you were talking about with nutrient density in food.
Absolutely. A lot of food, whether it be in vitro, in the laboratory, in the test tube, whatever you want to call it, it's being... People always talk about gluten. Well, there's a lot more proteins than just gluten. And when they change the molecular structure of the plant, even from the seed, so it stays out in the field longer, it stays on the shelf longer, certain grains or breads will puff up and have more of a denser look for weight. A lot of these things aren't benefiting the people. And we will get back to you, and we're going to ask Dr. Richard Allen Miller a few questions, and he certainly deserves the right to answer some since he was the person that turned us on to you. So after the break, folks, we'll be right back. Good morning, America. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. And I have two guests. One is Thrice Saita, and his website is N as in November, A as in Apple, S as in Sam, F as in Frank, .life, L-I-F-E. And he's doing some thinking outside the box, ideas and solutions for the people in this new gig economy. And Thrice, you said some great stuff, and I just want Dr. Richard Allen Miller, Dr. Rick Miller, to comment. Now, obviously, we wouldn't have met you if it wasn't for him, and right on the front of your featured video on the website here is Dr. Rick Miller having an interview with you. And for those of you who haven't seen Dr. Miller, he's the one on the left wearing that hat that kind of looks like a 1960s ashtray.
Thanks.
And I hope that woke up Rick. And Rick, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, and thank you for letting us meet Thrice.
Well, yeah, you're welcome. How did? I turn our Good Morning America. Oh, well.
Hey, now you got it. Now you got to tell everybody what that hat is.
The hat. It is from Nepal. It is a Nepalese meditation cap that would normally on the top have some form of sacred geometry to help focus the meditation. The Bhutan and moving up into Nepal, I use a climber. Whitaker used to come to dinner with my father in Seattle every Thursday night before he started REI, and so I, by 16, was class 4 rock and ice climbing, and that's what I did. And what's now done is my favorites, Julie Vesipoli, Grace Thorne, others, they have taken the sacred geometry off my hat and started putting military logos of Navy Intel and some of the other things I've done over the years. It's just a logo. It's a branding, a way of, if I'm in a huge conference, a way that you can pick me out in the crowd.
Yeah, okay.
It's a device.
Yeah. No, Rick, let me ask you something. We talk every once in a while because for private reasons and for being on the air when Vince wants me to be a guest host on days he can't make it for whatever reason. And we've had a few shows together, and I just want you to tell the people what, because obviously you're doing some work with Thrice, and you're on one of the videos on the featured video here. Tell the American people what turned you on regarding his skill sets, his goals, his ideas and solutions that could benefit the American people.
Thrice is one of many individual regions that are attempting sustainable lifeboats, and right now I'm participating in sharpening that part of his system up with old-time information. Millennials are extremely intelligent, and they're not very practical, and they seek that balance between the two without the interface of certain forms of technology that may or not be here in a moment. In less than 3 days ago, most of the West Coast went down for 2 hours on the grid. And it happened. I'm sitting there at 8:30 in the morning, and all of a sudden I go, boop, and I have no power. Now, my girlfriend is in another part of town, no cell phone. What do you do now? What is your game plan when, with no warning, your children are in school, buses are not going to run because of an EMP strike, probably wiping out the ignition system? What are you going to do? What's your game plan? Nobody has given that a thought. And so I have begun with Matt Stein a network of sustainable agriculture and lifeboats in almost every state, and now I'm moving into Canada this year. And I have Mennonite and Doukhobor and other religious communities up there that have been working with me for 30 years through Conrad Richter's of Canada, but none of them are organized, and they don't know about each other. For example, the one I'd like you to do next week would be Xavier Hawk. He's in Florida right now, and he has a flying Chautauqua. That means a hot air balloon that goes from one community to the other, dropping down and bringing in entertainment. He's in 4 states with 8 closed down, closed system permaculture groups in 4 states. Several of them have monolithic domes. I stayed in one in Cloudland when I set up Chattanooga. Chattanooga was a project that took me 3 weeks. I went into the city, and the city fathers handed me the key to the city. I went to all the different bookstores, libraries, radio stations, TV. And then I did 3 workshops. And the first one was to take a 200-year-old family farm in the center of Chattanooga and turn it into a community garden run by children. And it right now, as a result of that 3 weeks with Michael Moore, we filmed it, we did it all. There'll be a movie someday. What happened next is Chattanooga's new logo is right here, right now. And that city currently produces 40% of the food that is consumed by the inhabitants there. Now, just-in-time delivery that Thrice and others have suggested are important is antiquated. It has longshoremen, it has Teamsters, it has the ocean, and it has the mafia, has all of it. And with that said, large cities like New York are going to be a nightmare in the 4th day when there's no food, there's no water, and there's no toilet. Now, nobody has given that a thought except with a gentle reminder that we had a couple days ago with the grid going down most of the West Coast for a brief moment in time. And what I've tried to do is, I don't want to be a leader. What I'm trying to do is leave some footprints for the young Turks, like Xavier Hawk and Thrice, to begin their own journey, as I have done for 45 years with the military. And I'm just putting in bunkers and communities. When I grew up in Seattle, I was part of Growing Family. We started the Rainbow Gathering. We started the Pike Street Market. We started the Bulk Commodities Exchange. We started Puget Consumer Co-op. We did a bunch of things. There's 2 houses up on Queen Anne Hill with Forrest Roth-Schomer was my roommate in my room. We had two to a room. Forrest started Abundant Life Seed Foundation. We have something happened back then that changed me. And that's why the military, even today, is still using me, because I have a vision of a broader picture. I bring to the table more vision with more degrees than anybody, last man standing kind of thing. And what I'm trying to do now is do a series of classes online for millenniums that want to know how to do free-range chicken. Let me give you a little story I did in Carlisle with the Amish. The Amish hired me. They took one of their high-end bishops and excommunicated him so he could do outreach at Acres USA. And he brought me back in, and I did 2 business plans with the Amish out of Carlisle. And the first was to create a low-cholesterol egg by taking their free-range chicken and playing Mozart and feeding them purslane, which is omega-3 acids, to create a lower cholesterol egg, which is still now the primary set of what the Amish are advertising for their eggs, all along the eastern seaboard. And I'm trying to leave footprints like that so that you, younger and younger than you, take these footprints and incorporate them into your own vision. Yours in Montana is quite different than the one in Arapahoe, Arizona, where I have a missile silo with a garden on top. And the one I want you to visit next is up in Sandpoint, Idaho, which is a Quaker retreat called Peaceable Kingdom on the Pack River. And Joe Wythe, who's 95 years old, was the protege of Frank Lloyd Wright, and he's 95 now. And he designed Unicorn Bunker, which is it's a bunker that he designed internally, and how you do your drawers and all the rest of it architecturally. And then his roof is his garden with dirt on it. And I believe that each habitat is different, and that's what we're going to be discussing with Thrice. Now, there's sidebars, like the young millenniums are taking drugs like we did in the 60s, but instead of taking ayahuasca, we were taking LSD. These are shortcuts to Grandma's house. And as I was trying to suggest to the millenniums, like all shortcuts, they're big bad wolves. And so you need to be aware of the landscape. And that's the same thing with habitat. That's what I'm about now with Thrice. He's just one more in the network that we are trying to put together as the postman. By the way, that's going to be one of my new email names. I will be the postman. And what I do is I bring the news from one to another. That's what Xavier Hawk is doing with his Flying Chautauqua on the East Coast. And so each region is different. We have, with these changes that are about to happen, we have an opportunity.
I agree. Well, we're in the gig economy, and if you're going to be doing classes, Rick, you got to get a new hat, first of all. I'm just saying. But, there's so much, just like...
I can get one like Cal Worthington. You all come down now, yeah.
Just like some of the facts that I was talking about regarding vitamins and minerals in the soil and what Monsanto's done to the American people and enzymes. amino acids, proteins.
By the way,
so much information.
That information, by the way, that enzyme thing you want, this is very important information. So I discovered something about enzymes.
Buddy. We have a break. I will let you speak after the break. America, we will be right back. Good morning, America. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli this morning. So, Bryce, you'll be happy to know.
Time, and then I'll get out of your way. That it's just a little cassette. So I discovered that all your primary neurotransmitters, that's precursors, break down and are gone in less than 6 microseconds. That's 10 to the minus 6 seconds at 97 degrees Fahrenheit. You get even close to 97 degrees for history. And with that, you lose all your access to your essential amino acids and or something taking something across the blood-brain barrier. And I was doing studies on the blue-green algae, spirulina, chlorella, and Aphaniophyson plus aqua, which grows out of Klamath Lake. And the spirulina and chlorella did not have neurotransmitters because they were primarily being grown in growth ponds under supervision, so they're sterile and clean, whereas Klamath Lake was an open system being exposed to microshrimp and daphnia, which means that it's not a true vegan food, but that's where the neurotransmitters came across. And why that was important to freeze dry rather than drum dry your product or field dry it like the sun is that it retained the neuro and polypeptides that were extremely important in that blue-green algae that distinguished it from the other two. Why? Because it then took trace minerals across the blood-brain barrier that were necessary to make true nerve tissue over glial cell. And that was a study I did with Robert O. Becker at the University of Washington when with severed perineal, and I was able to, in laboratory with people watching, regenerate a severed nerve trunk on my left knee. I had drop foot. And it took me 4.5 months because the glial cells and or sheath material or primary nerve tissue has the viscosity of tocopherols. It's like vitamin E. It's very viscous. And it took 4.5 months by gravity to fall down to the knee part to regenerate and regrow nerve tissue. What does that also suggest?
Hey, Rick, I'm going to put you on hold for just a little while because you and I will be together in the second hour. I just want to say goodbye. We're running out of time.
Oh, yes. No, I didn't know.
I want to say goodbye to Thrice. And Thrice, just so you know, I was pollinating eggplant and peppers in my solarium with a little paintbrush just now because it's indoors connected to my cabin. It doesn't get the benefit of the bees or any insects. So I just pollinate a lot of things at certain times of year with a paintbrush, especially my early tomatoes before the bees find the greenhouse even outside. Now, that being said, we talked yesterday, I mentioned about robotics, automation, artificial intelligence going to be taking millions and tens of millions of jobs. Very few people are going to have the education and the money to have the education to code and do things of that nature. So thinking outside the box and having this new gig economy, which you're approaching at a common sense, logical standpoint, like producing food, I think has a lot of merit. So before we hear the music, which could be any second now, please tell the American people, anybody who wants to get involved, should they go to your website? Do you want to give out a phone number? What do you want to do? Right?
Again, we're focused on crowd. We're focused on crowdfunding farming, so we have pretty much streamlined it. Basically, you can just go to our website, like you said, NASF.life. You can find the campaign page, and you can see the ICFC page right now, and that's the Indoor Community Farm Center page. And you can click there. There's a contribution link button, and you can just contribute right there if you want to, contribute and sponsor this farm campaign. But we also have a merchandise store called saltofearth.life. And on there, on the first page, we feature our farm campaign, as well as we have farm merchandise products, shirts that say things like Farmer Tough, Family, Farmer in different ways across the shirt, really kind of trendy, eye-catching shirts. And that's a way you can really support what we're doing. But besides that, just go to the website, contact us via email, contact us via phone, however you can reach out to us.
Bryce, thank you for being on. Let me know if I can be of service in some way, okay?
All right, thank you so much for having me on. Have a
Good morning, America. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. Hour 2 with Dr. Rick Miller. Now, Rick, that was a very insightful conversation that we had with Bryce. He was very impressive, very eloquent in speech, knew what he was doing, had his goals set up. I can see why you were very interested in his cause. And, folks, for those of you who live in urban, suburban America, which are 90% of the people, and it's probably close to that who don't grow their own food, and the homeostasis in the body needs good nutrition, needs the proper bioavailability, the metabolism, the excretion, the absorption of nutrition through vegetables that are not grown in pastures that have been chemically and mechanically neutered, meaning the soil. So it's so important to think about self-sufficiency and nutrition and health all in the same paragraph. Rick?
Well, I don't know where you want me to go with that. What I was trying to...
Well, the reason why I did is because I know you wanted... I had to interrupt you because I had to say... I had to be considered...
Thrice, yeah, I gotcha. And thrice is typical of individuals I'm now meeting in this network I'm putting together across North America. He's typical. And I'm meeting some incredible people like you and thrice others. And each one of you forms a voice across America with options and opportunity. I have a reporter here listening with me right now taking notes, and he's going to write for a couple of newspapers, and he's taking notes, and his observation, well, we've got to go out and warn people. And I said, no, it isn't about a glass half empty. It's about an opportunity and a glass half full. This is not a bad thing to happen. It's actually inevitable. It can't not happen. And as a result, if it wasn't God doing it and the earth doing it and timing doing it, you would be doing it because I've had, like you, enough. And it's time for a change. How do we do this in a manner that there's less blood, where it's more comfortable? We laugh rather than cry. That's the Greek, divine comedy and divine tragedy. There's your option.
Very well said. As everything you do say is very well said. Now, Rick, I would like to deviate into a different topic. Basically, combination, the fake news, bought and paid for reality, if you will.
Fake news,
and the elite celebrities who feel that they're smarter than the rest of the population. And basically what usually happens is the people who get the opportunity, whether through nepotism or some movie thing or become a celebrity somehow, they're bought and paid for in the back room.
Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. And so anyway, basically what bought and paid for really means is that the elites have sold out the poor middle class, the bottom 93%.
Well, and the presumption that somebody can make a better decision for me than myself.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And the new media is more effective by bypassing the oligarchies and gatekeepers by going directly to the people, and that's what we do here, Rick. And I'm looking at the Drudge Report, and basically people freak out on Trump detention centers, and then, by the way, they're actually Obama's. And a smuggler abandoned a 6-year-old child in the Arizona desert. And this is all done in order to make Trump and the Republicans...
collateral damage. Yeah.
So I'm going to give...
Vincent and I have talked about this BS for a number of radios, but I have to tell you something. With all things said, Putin is possibly one of the worst criminals in the world. He is the third richest man in the world, and yet he's done more for Mother Russia than any of their leaders in their world history. And so with that said, take a look at Trump. So we look at Trump, and we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. He's a buffoon in some manners. He's ignorant. He is bullheaded, and yet he's a nationalist. Whereas, what would have happened if the Clinton had gotten elected? Well, the first thing that she would have done was appoint her husband to run the United Nations. Now you would have the single most powerful couple in the world working directly for the Bushes. Now, my sister is a Democrat, and she's extremely educated. She's as educated as I am, different than I am, and yet she's the same genes as I am. She's a Fulbright scholarship. I mean, she went to Mills, Phi Beta Kappa, and yet she's a Democrat. I remember the look on my father's face, he said now, when he realized he was no longer a Republican. Now, I remember the shock. My dad, he was lost. I thought I was going to lose my dad then. It was weird. And what's happening is, and I want to say this succinctly, this is no longer the country I served and protected. We've been hijacked. And you don't know who your enemy is. This fake news thing that you're talking about. What's real? Where you find truth is inside yourself. It's not out there in the media. It's when you read something in the media and you go internal to determine how you feel about that. That's EQ. And that place is where you will find your real truth. And it's different for each of us. That's what made us God's favored. We had choice. Beyond that, what is happening is that choice is being taken away from us.
I agree. And, Rick, I'm going to comment on what you just said. I'll be honest with you. If Hillary got in, we would have been in World War III with Russia, and Russia would probably have used the uranium that Hillary sold to them. Yeah. Now, let me just mention a few facts about Trump, and he's not perfect, but when I look in the mirror, when any of us look in the mirror, none of us are. But he's taken basically no salary. He's had 1 million times less cooperation than Obama by the powers that be. He was already famous. He didn't need the money. I think he's doing this because he really loves the country, and he's trying to help people back.
He's a nationalist.
And I'm hoping.
Yeah.
And, even though I'm not crazy about his tax plan because it did put a lot of money into the billionaire pockets, it's a start. He did gain a few million jobs, even though they were mostly service and hospitality, where that's the highest growth. But you look at blacks, Hispanics, minorities, lowest unemployment rate in history. He cut regulations at least 2 to 1, and I think I'm being very gracious with that. I think it's even more than that. The energy America boom that we're going to hit over the next few years, we should be the #1 exporter of oil and natural gas in the coming years. ISIS has been beaten back. More nations are paying their fair share, with NATO defense and things of that nature. There's going to be more accountability in the VA and protection for whistleblowers. He appointed Neil Gorsuch to the U.S. Supreme Court and a lot of other federal judges. I think he's doing a lot of good things, but what I want to talk about is some of the, and that's why I talked about the heading on Drudge Report just a moment ago, about immigration and the fake news. And I just want to give some points and some objective facts to show what the little people are feeling. This has nothing to do with brown skin. This has nothing to do with what gender you are, what sexual orientation you are, what ideology or religion you are. This has nothing to do with it. And I'm going to read some statistics and data here, folks, so please bear with me. I'm going to start with over 4,300 Americans are killed by illegal alien criminals every year. Over 900,000 convicted illegal felons are roaming the streets. And the crimes, by the way, are committed probably 100 to 1, if not 1,000 to 1, against the poor and the middle-class American people, not the filthy wealthy. So when you hear some elite corporate CEO or some celebrity touting about how we need more immigrants, look at their wallets, look at the house they live in, look at the boats they have, look at their paychecks. And this isn't about class envy, folks. I've talked about this in great detail. When you have things like corporate buybacks, when you have the super wealthy borrowing all this money at 0% interest, when you have QE, quantitative easing, for 10 years, when 95% of that money goes to the top 1 to 7%, mostly to the top 1 to 2%, money printed out of thin air where the cost shifting has to be burdened by the poor and the middle class. See, the little guy has no representation. The little guy has no restitution. The little guy has no plan of action. So I want to look at car insurance, public education, health care. All that is being cost shifted to the middle class. Because when a cop pulls over an illegal immigrant driving, who shouldn't be, who shouldn't even be here, he walks away because the cop can't ticket that person because they had no insurance. So the burden goes to the person who was hit, assuming it wasn't even their fault. And that's why car insurance and public education and health care is so high. When you can walk into an ER and get care, who's going to pay for that? The American people. So I have a quote here. We are, quote, we are sending a clear message. Just because your child gets across the border, that doesn't mean the child gets to stay. And every person who has just listened to that thinks it's Trump. I'm going to tell you after the break whose quote that is. Stay with us, America. Hello, America. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli, and my guest this hour is Dr. Rick Miller. And happy longest day of the year to everybody. But I was mentioning a quote regarding information or immigration, and I'm sure most people think it probably came from President Trump. But I'm going to read that quote one more time. We are sending a clear message. Just because your child gets across the border, that doesn't mean the child gets to stay. That quote is by Hillary Clinton. So don't get fooled by the left-right paradigm, and absolutely don't get fooled by the people who are bought and paid for by the elite powers that be. And we are heading into a new industrial revolution where robotics, automation, artificial intelligence is going to take tens of millions of jobs away from the American people. And according to the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, 1 in 5 illegal aliens will go on food stamps if Congress approves DACA. This is federal government facts, okay? Non-citizens account for 22%, more than one-fifth of all federal murder convictions, 18% of fraud, 33% of money laundering, 29% of drug trafficking, 72% of convictions for drug possession paid for by the American taxpayer. If you don't put into the kitty, you don't take out of the kitty. That's the way it should be. Now, basically, when you look at all these articles about the children and all this stuff, it's for the kids, it's for the environment. No, it's for the elite globalists. Very few of these kids coming across are toddlers. The kids are usually much older. They're often not in their family units, and they came over as mid or late teens, and many illegal immigrant children say they're children, and they turn out to be adults. And this is a worldwide Western phenomenon, not just in the U.S. Basically, where I'm going with this is that the American people are broke. 60% don't have $1,000 in savings. 80% of people live paycheck to paycheck. Why should the elite make the burden go to the poor and middle class, which is basically extinct, to pay for these people? It has nothing to do with skin pigmentation. It has nothing to do with gender or sexual orientation or religion. It's the fact that the American people are frickin' broke, and nobody's representing the American people. No one's sticking up for the little guy. And, of course, for those of you who listen, the little guy is the bottom 93%. Not the bottom 10%. It's the bottom 93% that are treading water to stay alive. And after that little rant, Rick, please feel free to give your opinion on that.
Well, I thank you. I'll pass the baton back to you. I appreciate what you're trying to do and offering solutions. And thank you for having Thrice on, because he's just one of many in this network that is now trying to be formed with Matt and I. Matt, by the way, and Stein and I have just uploaded our first survival skill workshop videos that are now going to be available on my website and Vimeo. And I'm so proud of working with Matt because his knowledge base is as good as my own. I'm different, and the two of us complement each other in terms of what's going to be necessary in the following years in order to take everything that's happening and turn it into a positive opportunity for change. Now, change is the rule, and you can count on that. Who is doing it? It all starts with you. Change means nothing if you're not doing it. And the nice part is time is not real. That means it doesn't matter, because if I'm doing it and you're doing it, we are all doing it, because I am you and you are me. And I am the walrus.
Okay, you're getting deep now. And first of all,
it doesn't matter.
I want to comment on, first of all, Rick, I want to
fact that you're adamant right now shows me we're over the target. Release the Kraken.
All right, Rick, hold on to that next rant, and we will be back, folks, after the break. Hello, America. Rich Scheben from OffGridMontana.com sitting in for Vincent Finelli. My guest today is Dr. Richard Allen Miller. And we're talking about quite a few things. We had a very interesting young man with us. His name is Thrice. We talked about his website and what he's doing for the American people with North American Sustainable Farms with the help of Dr. Rick Miller. And, you know, in today's climate of corruption, manipulation, deception, nepotism, it's almost impossible for the little guy to control his or her own destiny. And that's why the powers that be are making sure every group fights against one another. We're allowing the elite to literally poison us against ourselves. And it seems like so many people at the very top are bought and paid for. FBI, CIA, NSA, all our intelligence agencies, politicians in Congress that vote after one term a full benefit package and pension, lawyers, judges, bankers, even science today is bought and paid for. So it's very hard for the little guy to survive. You know, they call it populism, but it really is survival. So when you look at the benefits of living in rural land versus urban, suburban America, where you have so many government regulations and high costs and forced consumerism, in the cookie-cutter follower, politically correct subdivision mentality that 90% of Americans live in. And that's one of the reasons why I talk about things like, you know, off-grid living, country living, and words come to mind like adventure, freedom, challenges, liberty, curiosity, nature, gaining skill sets, gardening like we talked about, growing non-GMO produce, alternative energy, raising animals, could be hunting and fishing, preserving foods. There's so many things in the natural way of life. Now, I'm not saying to turn your back totally on 21st century technology. I'm talking about relearning the old 19th century skills, but dovetailing them with 21st century technology. Now, Rick, you mentioned that right before the break that Thrice, his goals, his objectives were right on, and I agree. It was a real pleasure having that young man on the air. very well spoken, by the way. You can tell he put a lot of thought behind this project. And Matt Stein, you mentioned him as well. I like Matt a lot. He's a really good guy, very smart. So next time you talk to Matt, please tell him that Rich says hi. And on that note, you grew up in kind of a rural area. You had a mix of rural and urban suburban growing up, but you grew up doing a little hunting. You do a little gathering, a little gardening. And I'm sure your background and the varieties that you learned, the skill sets that you've obtained, will help people like Thrice and the American people live a different dream that's more sustainable and that's routed through common sense and logic, and not by the corporate oligarchies and big government controlling every move that we make. Rick?
This reporter, this kid that's here with me right now, and Thrice, I have a lesson I want to leave with both of them and you. I really think what you're doing is very important, so it's my deep pleasure to know and be working with you, by the way.
I'm back at you.
I used to make a distinction. I had a sifu that made a distinction between learning something and studying it. And if I wanted to learn something, I was kicked out of the class and not welcome back. Because his lesson to me was that you don't learn something. What you do is study it and integrate it into yourself, and then it becomes uniquely different than what I'm teaching. And that's the purpose, not intent, of what I'm about. I want my information to be used as a stepping stone for the next person's book and or integration into their own things. I've watched permaculture mature from Bill Mollison when he first started it to what now such people as Xavier Hawk or Step Holzer or others might suggest in their own way of integrating it. And that's the distinction between learning something and studying it.
Very well said, as usual, Rick. And, I always, whether I have you on the air with me or somebody else, or it's Vincent myself, or I'm alone, and we talked about this privately yesterday, you know where I'm going with this next question. I always try to reroute ideas, solutions, advice, suggestions, lifestyles, outside the box thinking to benefit the little guy, the bottom 93%. And I know it's getting probably so old with the redundancy, but I just feel it's so necessary to do, and that's why projects like this and starting to move, people moving rural. I mean, let's face it, when you speak to someone like Thrice and you listen to how eloquent in speech he is and how much thought he's put behind this idea, it really gives hope to the American people and to us old farts because, the millennials don't have the best reputation, living in their parents' basement and dead up to their eyeballs. They don't want to work, this, that. We've heard it all. But I think there's some really good millennials out there. The problem is, what I've talked about today, and so have you, Rick, and so is Thrice, is the imbalance. The imbalance in nature. And I don't mean just between nature and technology, but between hard work and cultivating your interests and hobbies, between humor and being serious. Political correctness has almost destroyed humor in America because people are afraid of being called a controversial, extremist, racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, intolerant, violent hater with a phobia on the back of every word and an ism and ist and
your description of that, by the way, was called trust. We have lost trust.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you gave to me. That's what is wrong at this moment with the American government and the American people. We have lost trust in ourselves.
Well, we have, and that's why self-sufficiency can regain that trust, can regain the dialogue.
Right. There it is.
We have a lot of guests. In fact, I'm going to have a boatload of people just this weekend here, and we sit around the fire, we talk. have a beer.
That must be fun. I would love to join you there. I would someday.
Well, Rick, if you want to drive the 6 hours, you're more than welcome, buddy.
6 hours? It's a little more than that, buddy.
Yeah,
I'll tell you, just to Spokane is a long journey for me.
Yeah, I'm about at least 4 hours from Spokane.
So I'm going on a journey at the end of September. Unity Church, Metaphysical Church, has invited me to do Reedsport, Seattle, Bellingham, Nanaimo, Victoria, and Vancouver, BC, in first speaking at night in metaphysics, and then the next day offering an 8-hour intensive workshop. And it turns out each one of those locations wants to do a different workshop. One wants to do it on off the grid. Another one wants to do it around farming. A third one wants to do ESP, thinking with the gut. I have a number of them. There's even one group that are bringing me in to teach them how to fine-tune martial arts using breathing techniques. Now, it's a chapter in Power Tools. I have a whole series of books now ready for press, and anybody that would like to patron that, they get a 10% return on their money, they get mention in the book for making it happen, and they get it off of first sales. And so I need about $5,000 per title. I have 40 titles ready to go to press, and I haven't even talked to you about other projects I'm doing. Matt and I have just come in with a series of 16 hours of intense, sustainable lifeboat power tools, and at 1 hour each on a different topic. They are now up on Vimeo and my website, $1.99 to watch the movie, make it your own, etc. And I have just put in a 2,300 book download library free of rare old occult manuscripts that I quote from in my metaphysics audiobook series I did when I taught at Harvard. And the purpose of that is, rather than take me as the gospel on the audiobook, here's the resource I use, and you can draw your own conclusions, because that's the footprint I'm seeking.
Okay. My only suggestion after what you just said there, Rick, is if you do give a lecture on ESP, I think you should definitely wear the hat.
Oh man, I love you too, buddy.
you know, it's total tongue.
Comic relief. We need it. We absolutely need the
and see, that's part of the what we talk about all the time, the lack of balance between humor and being serious. When we're on the radio, we talk, we're trying to reach people with information, with ideas and solutions. We have to talk about the corruption, the manipulation, and the war against the little people, the bottom 93%. It has to be discussed. So when I give financial, economic, social, and political rationale, people understand the why I'm doing it, the why I'm...
I think one of the reasons Trump is trying to stop this immigration crap thing going on, one reason is that there's a whole bunch of Muslims. There's a map on the latest Bing showing how many people have migrated to the U.S. from what country. And you will notice it's mostly Muslim. And what they're doing is they're going into Mexico, which has no regulation, and then trying to come across our borders via Mexico. It's not Mexicans that are the problem.
Oh, I totally agree. And this is why, most of this immigration, most of the forced ideology, most of the so-called people who say it's the left, it's a very few people at the very top, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Soroses, UN, people who are bought, buying, and paid for, who are in control of the central banks, who can push buttons, create money out of thin air, that's buying and paying for people to destroy our heritage, tradition, and culture. Folks, hold on till after the break. We will be right back. Happy longest day of the year, America. And we're getting close to the end of the 2-hour show today. I want to thank everybody for listening. And I want to thank Dr. Rick Miller for being our guest, and of course Thrice as well. And I think people, Rick, do appreciate from the feedback that I get that We're trying to make people think for themselves, to do reading, to research, to stand for principle, to obtain skill sets like gardening, preserving food, raising animals, hunting and fishing, edible medicinal plants, the type of land and acreage to buy / rural property, teaching and helping others, creating a balance in life, being debt-free. And I think, you know, and you and Thrice talked about this today. I mean, look how much food storage the average American has. You know, on paper, it's like 9 meals. That's 3 days. So you were talking about an EMP earlier, or, you know, East Coast going out of power for hours or days. Same with the West Coast. It happens often, especially with all the hacking that's out there today and the terrorism. So I think people do need to start thinking outside the box, start to prepare, just like our forefathers did. When I first came to Montana, end of '86, I can't tell you how many old-time families I met, especially in eastern Montana, when I went out antelope hunting and stuff like that, and which I did for quite a few years. Long story short, their grandparents and great-grandparents didn't even know there was a depression because they raised animals. They hunted and fished. They had a garden. They were self-sufficient. They lived below their means. They knew the fine line between needs and wants, and they knew not to go deep into debt except for land or a home. And on that note, Rick, I'm going to let you have the last few remaining minutes. And again, I want to thank you for being here.
No. Listen, any of you listening, I am hurting right now. I need book sales. Yeah, I have GoFundMe. I'm not interested in money. I'm interested in exchange. Buy my books. Give them to other people. If you want to support me, buy my books. Go to my website, richardallenmiller.com, and go to /shop, and there you are. And I have ebooks, I have hardback, paperback, I have it all. And Amazon, I'm at war right now with Amazon, and I've got them cold. Now I'm seeking a copyright lawyer, and I need help with a high-end copyright lawyer. I called one a couple of days ago in Colorado, and guess what she said? Representing you, Dr. Miller, would be a conflict of interest. And I said, why? Why would that be a conflict of interest? She said, that telling you that would also be a conflict of interest. I am a person of interest, and there's something out there dogging me financially, and I am a good enough writer that I'm worth supporting my writing, and if you want, buying it and giving it to friends. And I'm inexpensive, and I'm not begging. What I want right now is your support in any way you can, and something is trying to take me out financially.
Well, Rick, I hope some of the listeners help you out there, and
I'll be fine. I'm doing workshops now. I'm doing audio. I'm teaching online with Thrice. That's what we're going to do, is start an online series of agricultural classes where I'm there to answer your questions. And that's what Thrice is doing as part of his Sustainable Lifeboat.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's very worthy. I think the information that you give out to the American people is exceptional, and I hope, the little guy...
Well, you're the one that made the encyclopedia happen, by the way, Rich, so thank you. By the way, everybody, it was Rich Scheben that made the Encyclopedia of Alternative Agriculture happen.
Well, thank you, Rick. Folks, I want to thank everybody for listening to USAPrepares.com today. You all have a great week and weekend coming up, and we will talk to you next time. Thanks again, Rick. Thank you.